One of the things that makes WordPress so awesome is all of those plugins. And so a lot of us run a lot of different plugins on our sites, but how do you know when you've gone too far? Let's go ahead and talk about that. Hello there, David Risley here with blogmarketingacademy.com, where we talk about building a WordPress business without getting overwhelmed. If WordPress and online business is something that is of interest to you and you want to get some help, getting WordPress to do what it is that you want it to do, make sure you subscribe to the channel because that's what we do. Okay, so the question here today is about plugins, and we want to get into how many is too many? Like, is there some threshold that when you get to a certain number of plugins that are active on your site that you just kind of cross the line and you really need to dial that thing back? So let's talk about that. The first thing to understand about these WordPress plugins is why you should think about how many that you're running. You probably have noticed that the more plugins that you have active, the slower the site can get. And there's a reason for that. That's because every plugin comes with a payload. They make, a lot of them make calls to third-party services. If it's a plugin that integrates your site with something else, they load up all these JavaScript and style sheet files behind the scenes. And a lot of these plugins, what they do is even when they're not really in use on that particular page of your site, they will actually load up those files anyway. And so what happens is that it makes it so that when somebody comes to your site and you have a page view on your site, that instead of loading up just the quick little core WordPress files and maybe the ones for your theme, it's loading all this baggage in there too. And so it's kind of like, if you're bringing, you can imagine somebody going on a trip and they have the one, travel suitcase, but then you see those people who's like, they got to bring the whole thing with them, and they might have people carrying about 10 different suitcases for them. One has a much bigger travel footprint than the other one. And that's kind of what we're talking about here, is that it's like the equivalent between, having just one little carry-on baggage versus you're bringing the whole closet with you. That's what it's like when you're running a big pile of plugins. So what do you do about it? That's the big thing. I mean, we obviously are not going to run WordPress without plugins. I'll be honest, right now, as of this recording, I think I'm running 43 active plugins on the Blog Marketing Academy website. And if you read some blog posts out there that talk about how many plugins is too many, they'll think that I'm like mad, like I'm totally like out of my mind to be running 43 plugins. I've been on some sites though that they're running like up to 70 or 80 of them, and they seem to be running fine. And so there's not really a hard and fast right answer to how many is too many. So let's look into how can you run plugins and not have it screw up your site, not have it slow things down radically. There are some things that you should do and keep in mind as you're activating plugins. First of all, you want to make sure that you only run plugins that you're actually using. Okay, that's a big thing. Like I was in a client website just like a couple of days ago, and they bought Thrive Suite. And you guys may know that I'm a pretty big fan of Thrive Suite. Now, Thrive Suite, I lost count right now, but they probably have 9 or 10 different plugins that you could install, like Thrive Apprentice and Quiz Builder and all that. The thing is, she wasn't using them. The only thing that she was using was Theme Builder and Architect. Architect was really the only plugin. No, I think she was using Thrive Leads as well. But she had Apprentice and Quiz Builder and Clever Widgets and basically everything that they had turned on. You don't need that. If you're not using it, turn it off. Just let it sit there, okay? So that's one thing you could definitely do, is just don't activate things just because you purchased it. Only use it because you're using it actively. Another thing to do is to look at plugins that have multiple purposes all at once. I'll give you an example of this. A lot of people run plugins specifically to put social media sharing buttons on their site. And for a long time, I was using one called Social Warfare. And it's a pretty good plugin, and it does that, and it puts the counts on there and all that stuff. The thing is, a lot of themes have social media sharing buttons already there. A lot, Theme Builder has that aspect in there. Buddy Balls has has that ability. If you're using Elementor, you can stick it on there. Like, there's a lot of ways to put share buttons on your site. You don't need to run a whole additional plugin for it. So that's one thing that you can do, is to make sure that you're not putting things on your site that have a lot of feature overlap. If you're running a multi-function plugin already, see if you can use that capability, because that means you just, one thing can serve multiple purposes and we don't need to run excess stuff. Another thing is to test plugins before you just blindly turn them on. Now, a lot of cases, if you activate a plugin, it's gonna run fine, especially if it's a well-supported plugin that has a really good reputation. But, don't forget that most of our sites hosting will allow you to do a staging site, okay? And I really recommend that you make use of the staging site capability of your web host. So take your site over into staging, just clone the whole thing, and then test the plugin over there before you turn it on the live site. Feel free to run your staging site through a speed tester as well, like GTmetrix or PageSpeed Insights over there on Google, and see what kind of impact these plugins have before you just blindly turn them on your live site. That can sometimes save you a little bit of trouble. You also definitely need to make sure that you're using good hosting and that you've got enough server horsepower for your site. It makes a massive difference. If you're on some cheap little $3 a month web hosting company, you're trying to run some big membership site, and you might have 40 or 50 plugins going on, you're going to be stressing it out big time. It's not really enough horsepower for your site. I'm hosted on Cloudways, and with Cloudways, you can choose what kind of server you want to use, which is, I really like that about Cloudways. But just recently, I decided, hey, let's go ahead and bump up my server horsepower. I pretty much doubled it, and man, what a difference it made in the back end of things with those plugins. And so never forget about the server settings and the server horsepower. And I would recommend that if you're running sites that you want to have more things going on it, don't go with some cheap shared hosting plan. You're going to need a little bit more power than that. You might need to tweak the memory settings a little bit on your server so that it runs well. Keep in mind, this is one of the reasons I'm a big fan of Cloudways, because they allow you to do all that stuff, whereas some of the more bulk hosting companies won't. Another thing that you could do is to use a plugin manager. Now, I'm going to show you one in just a little bit, but there are plugins out there that allow you to manage other plugins, ironically. And one of the things that you can do is to activate plugins, except that by default, WordPress will activate that plugin across the whole site, like site-wide, okay? Now, it's up to the plugin author to program that thing in a smart way so that it's not loading up a bunch of resources that aren't necessary, okay? But some don't, okay? One thing I've seen is some contact form plugins, as an example, where you might have one page on your site, the contact page, that uses that form, but yet the plugin is loading up the JavaScript and the CSS files for that plugin across the entire site, even across all your blog posts and everything, which slows things down unnecessarily. You really only need to have that plugin turned on one page, don't you? And so these plugin managers allow you to do that. There's one out there called Plugin Organizer that I used for a long time. I'm not a massive fan of the interface, but it works really well. And then in just a second, I want to show you one called Perfmatter. Now, it's an actual performance plugin, but it also allows you to take control over when your plugins and your style sheets and stuff like that are loading up. So I want to show you how that works in just a second. But speaking of performance plugins, you should be using one, okay? They're really, really handy. They allow you to turn on caching and do some things like minifying your plugins, which basically takes all the blank space and the white space out of your CSS files and your JavaScript files. And you need to test these things in staging, because sometimes you can turn these features on and they'll actually break something. So always make sure you test stuff like that. But that being said, these performance plugins can do a really good job of minimizing the speed impact, even though you might be running a whole bunch of plugins on your site. Now, WP Rocket is a really well-known one, which is good, by the way. It's actually a really nice plugin. A lot of people use like free caching plugins like W3 Total Cache. There's a lot of options out there. If you search the plugin repository, you're going to see a bunch of them. I am personally using one called Breeze plugin because it comes from my host, which is Cloudways, so it's really, really tight integration, and the plugin works just fine, and it's also completely free, which is nice. And then Perfmatter, which I'm about to show you for the plugin management, has all kinds of performance enhancements built right into it. A lot of what WP Rocket does, Perfmatter will do. But Perfmatter is lighter weight. It doesn't have the fancy interface, and it's just a lightweight little plugin. It just makes sense if you're trying to speed up the performance of your WordPress site. Don't make the plugin that you're using to try to do that be kind of beefy in and of itself. You want something lightweight and efficient, and Perfmatter does that really well. Okay, so we're here in the back end here, and we've got Perfmatter. This is the plugin I wanted to show you. Now, I'm not going to walk you through every option here. Like a lot of these plugins, you can disable a lot of default aspects of WordPress that you might not be using, and so this can decrease the amount of things that's being loaded up and that type of thing. A lot of this is beyond the scope of this particular video, and so we don't really need to go over this right now. Maybe I'll do it on another video. But one of the things I do want to make mention of here, I think it's under assets, is they have this thing called Script Manager. Okay, this is what allows you to manage things like plugins across your site. And so I've got it turned on. Now, the way that this thing works is that it puts it up in the WordPress admin bar at the top, so that when you're actually on your site, like you can see I'm logged in, I'm on my own homepage right now, I've got a thing called Script Manager up here in my admin bar. So let's go ahead and click on this thing. Okay, so as you look at this, you can see all the various things that Perfmatter actually sees as turned on. Now, you don't need to know what all these things are because they're grouped under the thing that's loading it up. This is all the BuddyBoss platform because obviously I am using BuddyBoss. We've got other plugins here, and so it's all set up here in such a way where you can do things like turn them off. Okay, now keep in mind, when you turn them off, you're basically controlling it on the page that you're on. So in this case, I'm on my home page, okay? And I can turn things off. Like here's an example here. I'm running LearnDash on my site, but obviously on my home page, there's no need to be loading up anything regarding LearnDash because it's not a course page, right? And so I've got LearnDash turned off on my home page. But by default, it'll be turned off on this particular page, but we're going to say it's disabled everywhere, and then you can set up exemptions. And so I have it set up to where LearnDash is disabled every place except for courses, modules, lessons, quizzes. Essentially, these are things where LearnDash would actually be needed, okay? Also, I've got it set up to where it'll exempt logged in users. And the reason is because obviously a logged out user is not going to be going through a course, okay? So it's not necessary for them, okay? And so you have a lot of control here. Some of it can get a little nerdy, but it gives you the idea of how you can use the script manager, and you can turn plugins off or whatever. I mean, you could even get down into actual individual files if you have the knowledge to do that. You can, let's say I didn't want this swiper plugin, it's 135 kilobyte, to be loaded up on my home page. Well, I'll just turn it off. Done. Okay. And then of course I can set up exemptions and the whole thing. All right. So that's how the script manager works. It gives you a lot more control over being able to run a lot of plugins, but selectively load them across your site. Okay, so between having good solid web hosting, using a performance plugin, and also using a selective plugin manager if necessary, you can see that you can actually put quite a few plugins into WordPress and the site will run in a respectable fashion. Okay, so it isn't as if you need to read some post out there that says try to keep it under 10 or something, and you're like pulling your hair out thinking, how the heck can I possibly get along with only running 10 plugins? You don't have to. You can go ahead and beef that thing up. Now, again, make sure you're only running the plugins that you're actually actively using. Okay, that's a big thing. Okay, now that begs the question. If the plugin is sitting there on WordPress, but it's deactivated, is it hurting anything? Do you actually need to delete the plugin in order to save those resources? The answer is no. If you have a plugin sitting there inside of WordPress, it's installed, but it's not active on your site, it is not doing anything bad to your performance. Okay, it's just simply not. The way it is that when you activate a WordPress plugin, it kind of hooks it into the actual code of WordPress, and that's what executes it. But if you deactivate it, that hook is removed. And so basically the plugin files are just sitting there. Absolutely no harm done. The only time that an unactivated plugin is going to have any impact at all is if you, in the back end only, go and visit the plugins page or visit the updates page of WordPress, because it will scan for updates on that plugin, even if it's not active, okay? And so there's a little bit of server horsepower going and checking for updates. But on the live site, as far as the public is concerned on your site, zero impact whatsoever about having a deactivated plugin just sitting there, okay? So that's one reason, if you're, let's say you bought Thrice Suite and you think, well, that'd be really cool. I love having these plugins. Maybe it saves you some hassle down the road, but you're not using it right now. Deactivate it. Just let it sit there. And if you decide, let's say that you've got Thrive Apprentice or something like that, you think, well, I want courses later, but I don't have a course right now. Well, turn off Thrive Apprentice. You can turn it on when you have a need for it, okay? Okay, so let's end off with this. If you need some help with this, let me know. All right, we got a couple of ways that you can go here. If you are a member at the Blog Marketing Academy, and keep in mind, even the non-pro members, even the free members have access to this, you can go into the community forum and you can ask questions regarding the performance of your site, and I can help you in there. Now, I can only help you at a certain level from the outside. And so there's also the ability to book service with the Blog Marketing Academy, and I will actually get into your site and help you speed things up as much as I possibly can. Now, keep in mind, we can't go for perfection. You're never going to get it's going to be hard to run a site that has 30 or 40 active plugins, and we're going to be getting page speed scores of like 99 and 100. We're probably not going to get there. But at the end of the day, I know that some of this stuff can get a little nerdy, and you might be like, I don't really have the time to figure that stuff out. Well, I figured out a lot of it. And even though, as long as you have a respect for the fact that we're never going to make it perfect, as long as you're running plugins and stuff on your site, I will help you speed it up as much as you can. And keep in mind that performance is really important for traffic, because Google makes a pretty big deal over how fast your site is. If you go and read my post on the core web vitals, those things matter a lot in terms of your SEO, and the amount of plugins and the amount of things that you're running on your site can have a pretty big impact on your web vitals. So that's why this stuff is really, really important. Okay, so if you want to look into having me get into your site and help you speed that bad boy up, you can head on over to the services screen at blogmarketingacademy.com and learn a little bit about how that works. It's all credit-based, super flexible, and I look forward to potentially working with you. All right, I hope that was helpful. Talk to you later.